Hi, it is Cardiologist here. Today I want to show you the hardest job that I think I've ever done on my car, which is going to be to work on the struts. These are coilovers. We have here in the top a plastic shield. This plastic shield comes off, revealing the base of the strut and shock assembly. These three nuts are going to have to come off. There's a cap here that covers the center nut. Do not unscrew this center nut until the strut is off the car. Step number one is going to be that we're going to jack up the car and remove the front wheel. And again, while I'm at this, I'm going to do the front brakes. So this video is going to be a front brake job, which is fairly straightforward, and a removal and replacement of front struts, which I think is an incredibly difficult job, and quite honestly, I'm not sure that I recommend it for people to try on their own, but you guys can entertain yourselves with my attempts. The only reason I'm even making this video is because I struggled for days on the other side. I think I learned a way to do it in such a manner that it'll help you guys. Anyone else trying to struggle with it, I can share with you finally how I got it done, and I can also share with you some information that I just couldn't find anywhere else. Okay, I have a 17mm lug wrench and a breaker bar. While the car is still on the ground, you have to loosen up the nuts, the lugs. Just loosen them so that they turn, but obviously you do not want to take them off. After the lug nuts have been loosened, we're going to lift up the car. The reason we do this is because it takes so much force to loosen these that if I lifted up the car first, the wheel would just spin. With the car lifted up, we now remove all 5 lug nuts like this, and then the wheel comes off. Okay, when the car is up in the air, make sure you get a jack stand under there. You never want to get underneath a car that's only held up by a jack, especially one which is not the greatest jack in the world. Always use a jack stand. Alright, so look, why am I doing all this? The front brakes, they just need routine replacement. That's a fairly easy job. But what am I doing with the struts? So, I don't know, 40,000 miles ago, I replaced the original Mercedes struts with a much better one. These are Bilsteins, and these are the Bilstein Heavy Duty. I recommend Bilstein and only Bilstein for these Mercedes-Benz. They have a technology that is really superior, and they work really well, but they are adjustable, and there is absolutely no information out there about how to adjust them, so I'm going to go over that today. How do I know that it's accurate? I really don't. It's just what has worked on my car, and if it works on my car and my car is riding well, then let us assume that it's reasonable to do. So these are an absolute dog to get out. I'm going to show you how we do it and then how we compress the spring and get rid of them and replace them. You can see that they're held on by a bolt here, and this is the nut on this end and the head of the bolt on this end. That's going to have to come out. That's heavy duty stuff. And then up on top, I already showed you that they're held in by these 3 nuts. So the first thing we're going to do is get the appropriate tool to fit and take off that bolt under there. Okay, so to do this properly, these are 21mm. On the nut, I have a 21mm wrench that you can see hanging off of it, and now on the bolt I'm going to put a 21mm socket right here with a breaker bar, and I am going to try to loosen this up. I happen to have an electric impact wrench, so I have just enough room to get that in there. I think that'll save a little bit of time. So I have the standard wrench to hold the nut. I'm going to use the impact wrench to try to power this off. So that worked. It loosened it up, and now I can get in there and hopefully use a standard tool to continue on. Okay, so now you see that this actually turns, and we will just use this to back that bolt all the way out. It's a long bolt. It takes a long time to get this thing out. Have patience. it will eventually come out. Okay, we got this bolt out, and that is a bear. When this goes back in, this goes to 165 Newton meters, which happens to be 122 pound-feet. So that was a tough one. Okay, next step is from up top. Using a 13 millimeter and a small extension, we're going to loosen off and remove all 3 of these nuts. But we are not going to remove the middle nut. Underneath here is the middle nut. Do not remove the middle nut. Do not. It holds the spring pressure. That would be a big problem. Do not remove the middle nut. Okay, I took off the 3 nuts. Of course, not the middle one. I did take off the cap, and this will all come off later, only when the spring is off and under compression. So now we're going to go back underneath the car, and this has been what I consider to be the hardest part. In order for this to come out, what we have to do is push this whole suspension down. But it's under a good amount of tension. The way that I'm going to do that, I don't know how official this is, but it sure as hell works. I have a 48-inch pry bar. Now, this is solid steel. Obviously, you can do a lot of damage to the car if you're not careful. I am going to put that steel only up in here where there is structural rigidity. If you put it at the thin metal, which is not meant to bear the weight of the car, well, you've got a very expensive problem on your hands. But if you put it on the thick metal here, it actually works. So let me show you how that happens. We get this guy in here. Alright, putting it right up in here. Now, I'm going to be pressing down, and when I press down, the whole unit comes down, and there'll be enough space that I can hopefully move this out towards the back of the car. Okay, so I already screwed up. When that happened, as soon as I moved the suspension downward, everything just kind of fell down and in the wrong spot. I put 1 nut back in to hold this, and now I'm going to go back again with the pry bar and try to get that thing out. Okay, well, true to form, it's not coming. So I can't seem to get this suspension down low enough. So what I think I'll do is jack up the other side of the car to take the weight off the front wheel. Hopefully that'll allow me to get just a little bit more downward travel on the suspension. Okay, so using the jack in the car, I've taken the front right wheel up just a little bit. You can see that there's just a little space under there. Hopefully that'll allow me to get that front suspension down more on the left side. And of course, ultimately what I'm trying to do is get this yellow hook over that suspension component, and then it's going to be removed backward like this, in this direction. So again, even with that maneuver, unsuccessful, and I think part of the reason is that I should take off this brake caliper because it's probably just not letting this move enough. So off comes the brake caliper. Like I said, I was going to be removing the brake anyway, so I may as well take that apart. Here we go with the brake caliper. In order to accomplish this, we're going to take off this screw over here and this screw down here, and I believe those are also 13 millimeters. Alright, with those 13 millimeters off, this brake caliper just slides off like this, and I'll hang it so it doesn't put strain on the hose and the wires. Okay, I've got the caliper off. It's hanging here. We're going to go ahead and take off the brake pads. These are junk. One here, one inside. There's the inside one. There's this one. Good. And I probably ought to go ahead and take off the brake caliper bracket. This is held on by an 18 millimeter socket and a bolt. It's very tightly torqued. I'll give you the spec later. And then I'm also going to go ahead and remove this brake disc by removing this T30 nut. Well, it's a T30 bolt over here. This is only down to 10 Newton meters. This retains the brake disc. So let's remove this guy and the disc. Okay, the caliper bracket is off and sitting here. That was really hard. Wound up using a breaker bar and then the socket wrench, 18 millimeters. Now we're going to get off the brake disc. Alright, so here's the T30, and then you can see because I've had this disc off and because I used anti-seize, the disc just comes right off. And I'll need two hands, but you can see that it's already loose. Okay, so I'm happy to report that that was the secret to success. With that off, you can now see that I was able to use the crowbar like I showed you, pull down the suspension, and now this guy is off. At this point I can just come up here, remove that one last nut, take out the whole coilover assembly with the strut. Okay, and so with that final nut you can now see that the strut assembly is removed, and now we get to the fun part. Okay, so now that the strut assembly is off the car, let's just talk about this for a second. This is the Bill Stein set of struts. Now these struts, interestingly, do not need to be replaced. I just did a silly thing a while back. First of all, you can see that there are certain adjustment rings. Alright, I can tell you just from experience that in order that this car rides correctly, I put it on the fourth one down. How do I know that? I don't. Basically, it was on the fourth one down on the right side, and the car had driven correctly on the right side, and therefore that must be a decent one. I have searched high and low to try to figure out any kind of reference on this, and there is no reference. The only thing that they say is that when you take off the original ones, you're supposed to measure the distance from here to here. Well, that's all well and good, but what if you've already taken off the original ones and they're nowhere to be found? Where's that spec? So I have the Mercedes WIS, and of course they do not have anything like this because they're expecting you to use official Mercedes parts, and the official Mercedes part is not adjustable. So all I will say to you is that when this is finally off, we're going to put it on the fourth one down, and that seems to work for my car, which is a W211 E320 2006 diesel. So next thing we have to do is compress this spring. This spring is under tremendous pressure. And when I say tremendous pressure, I mean like a lot of pressure, enough to hold up the car. If the car is 3 tons, okay, and more than half of the weight is in the engine, is in the front, so let's say 2,000 pounds in the front, 1,000 in the back, so that would be 1,000 per wheel. So we should assume that this spring is capable of holding about 1,000 pounds comfortably. If there is 1,000 pounds of tension in here and we just remove the bolt or let something slip, that is going to be a really, really bad day. People can be badly injured, people can be killed. So I will first recommend, again, don't do this job. I kind of regret that I did it, but at least I've learned how to do it. Now, there are all different kinds of spring compressors. These are solid and metal, and these are decent. I recommend using these if you're going to do it. Now, I bought ones from Harbor Freight. I recommend against using these from Harbor Freight. Why? Well, listen, I love Harbor Freight. I go there all the time, I buy their stuff, but I have to tell you, in this particular case, these things are garbage. I've already broken one set of them, and if these things snap on you in the middle, again, 1,000 pounds just immediately is released. I do not recommend these. So the other thing is that supposedly 2 are enough to work on the spring. I recommend using 3. So I'm going to use these 2 as the primary, and I'm going to use this one from Harbor Freight as the tertiary. Hopefully that'll do the job without us hurting ourselves. Okay, tips and tricks. First of all, I find it very difficult to get this thing in there unless you take it apart. So, look, I'm trying to get it in there. It doesn't really fit. It just doesn't fit. So I take it apart. That allows me to angle it in place. Then once it's in, I can now put this back together. Okay, I'm still having trouble because even with this upper one in, I really can't get in the lower one. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and release some of the tension here, but certainly not take off the nut because then all 1,000 pounds would just explode outward. That would be real bad. I have learned that the key tool for this job is one of these wrenches that passes through like this. That is the key. I got this one at Lowe's for like 20 bucks for a set. This is 17 millimeter. So I'm going to take off the tension to bring the nut to about here. Okay, so I have backed off the nut to about here. No danger of it coming off, but I took out some of the slack. That seems to be good because now I seem to have enough room that I can get this guy in there. And now that goes. All right, so we'll hook up both of these. Okay, so there's the first one in place. So, two tips regarding this, two additional tips. Number one, you must use lubricant on these threads. If you don't lubricate these threads, it gets really hot and it breaks, just like I broke one from Harbor Freight. This is the replacement. So tip number two is that instead of putting the nut up here, put the nut down here, because then you have more room for your socket or for your impact wrench. And tip number three is, everybody says do not use the impact wrench, and they say that, in my opinion, because it puts so much force on things that you really have the opportunity to break it and really have the opportunity to hurt yourself. All true. The only problem is, if you don't use the impact wrench, it's either not possible to do, or it would take you 45 to 60 minutes. So, I'll be using the impact wrench. Okay, now I got two on. With two on, I'm now going to put on the third, which I have discovered you really need to do. Okay, I got the third one on. Now, next step. Take your favorite lubricant, WD-40. Either the Blaster all-purpose lubricant, maybe some grease, something. You must spray the hell out of this. If you don't, you're going to get nowhere fast. And then you're just going to break it, and then you're going to be injured, or worse, or God knows what else. Okay, let's go do it. All right, so now I've got a 24 millimeter on my impact gun, and we're going to start working on this. Now, once again, I reiterate, this is not a job that anybody should do, and quite honestly, I regret that I'm doing it. Okay? It's really dangerous. I've already broken one of these things, and when they break, you can get killed or injured. So I am telling you, don't do it. All right? And if you are going to do it, at least follow the instructions, and the instructions say that you should sit here for as long as it takes and do it manually. But I am completely impatient, and on top of that, I'm fairly personally convinced that it probably can't even really be done very easily without that impact gun, so I'm going to be using it. Alright, so by just doing a little bit on one, then the next, then the third, trying to do them up evenly, I take off enough tension so that now you can see that there's no tension there, there's no pressure there, so now I can take off the top nut and remove the system. I'm also going to say that as I'm working, I'm basically assuming that I'm working, let's say, on a loaded gun, and much like working on a loaded gun, not that I know anything about guns, because I don't, but I wouldn't stand in front of one, and I wouldn't stand behind one. So if this spring goes, the energy is going to go that way, the energy is going to go this way. So look where I'm sitting. So I'm just going to try to reach over, do my work here, do my work here. Nothing's going to fall apart, but if it does, my body is not in the way. Okay, the top nut is off. There it is. We put that over here. And now, hey, look at that. There it comes. Okay. So now we have this piece stuck in here. I'm going to leave it in there. There's no reason to take it out. And the whole reason that I did this is to get this off, because this is the piece that I want to replace. My car has 168,000 miles on it, and I was starting to hear noise in it. And this is shot. And I've got a new one somewhere here. Yeah, there it is, from Febi, which of course is the same manufacturer as Bilstein. You see it right there. So that'll go well with these shocks. And of course this is holding its position, but again it's under tremendous tension, and if something were to break, yeah, that would be a bad day. Alright, so let's have a look at this Bilstein shock, or strut. So there's this collar, and this collar rests on a cotter pin. I'm going to tap this collar down and you're going to see that there's a lot of adjustment points. Let me get my hammer and tap that down. Okay, I've got this off. So now here you can see there's a recessed end that goes right into the cotter pin. And this cotter ring goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there's multiple adjustment points, and I'm really not sure which one is supposed to be which, but I can tell you that number 4 has worked well for my car, and so we're going to just keep it at number 4. If you do need to remove it, what you do is you go to where the pin is open like this, and I show you the tool that I have. I have one of these things where as I squeeze it, it opens. So look, if I wanted to move this pin, I would come in like this, squeeze, and then using a screwdriver, just pry it out. But as I've already stated, I have it in the correct location, so there's no need to do that in this particular case. Let me just get it firmly seated back in number 4, all the way around, and then we're going to put this together. Okay, so with the cotter pin firmly in position number 4, there's this bump stop which comes with the shock, or I should call it the strut because that's the proper name for it. Put this down so that I don't kill myself. Okay, now we're going to put this ring down with the recessed part downward. All right. Good. And now you see that that sits and fits right into the cotter ring. Okay. Then we put this guy over here. Okay, we put this in. And now the nut and the washer go on the new strut mount. So let's open that up. This is in the Febby box. Okay, and there it is. A nice new mount. So we're going to hook this back together. Okay, here's something important. The new strut right out of the box does not have the rubber lining, so you have to take the old rubber lining out of the old strut. I'll do that just by prying it out gently with a screwdriver. Okay, I got the rubber piece out. It's in pretty good shape. It's not split, it's not degenerated, so I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up and then reinstall it in our new one over here. Okay, there's only one way this goes in. There's one big fat one here, a medium one here, and then a small tab over here, and that corresponds with this. So you just put it in and firm it down. So now we are prepared with our new strut mount. Next, we're going to take the strut, we're going to insert it through its boot. The boot had remained within the spring. I could have removed it, but I didn't. It remains within the spring, and you just thread it over the end here until it comes through, like this. See how it's through already? Okay, and then in this goes. So it's through the boot. Everything's on. And now I just put the strut on top of this, and we're going to screw it down. Now this end of the spring sits in this recess right here. So as I put it in, I have to line up the spring like that. Okay, so I have this unit together and I put the nut back on. That means that now, even if any of these things were to break, nothing would go flying off and explode. So I can kind of take it easy now. That's good news. All right, so that did it. We now have one refurbished strut coilover assembly. We're going to get this guy back on the car. Once again, really not easy. But at least the dangerous part is over. Alright, so now we have the strut assembly and we're going to get ready to put this back on the car. So, it turns out that these holes up here are not actually symmetric. If you look carefully, the distance from here to here is short, but from here to here is long and here to here is long. So there is only one way that this thing can go in, and you have to line it up accordingly. So we're going to do that, and then I'm just going to hand tighten the nut so that the thing is going to hang. Okay, so I have the strut loosely in place, and coming up here you can see I have 2 nuts, 1, 2, hand tight. This one's not on yet. So now we're going to take that crowbar again. We're going to put it in here, driving this system down, and then we're going to try to slide this fork over this bar, which again is much easier said than done. But if we can get that done, well, then we're really home free. Okay, so it did not go. So I decided I'm going to tighten this nut to take up as much slack as I can, and then we'll try again. We'll tighten this all the way. And so after tightening that center nut, not all the way, but most of the way, I finally had enough room that I could pry it down and get this thing over. And now all I have to do is convince that bolt to go back through, and we should be really in pretty good shape. Okay, so we got these nuts back on, 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. The torque spec for these is 30 Newton meters, so I'm going to cinch these down, and then we'll go underneath. And for this gigantic bolt, which I have gotten through, the torque spec is 165 Newton meters, which I believe is 122 foot-pounds. Okay, everything is torqued. 122 foot-pounds down here. 30 Newton meters up here. I actually put the caps back on. I put this cover back on. So now, all I need to do is finish with the brake job. Alright, we got a nice strut. Hopefully this is going to take care of my ride issues. So here's what I'll do next. I'll clean this off, right? Clean that off with a little brake parts cleaner. Use a Scotch-Brite pad. Coat it with anti-seize. And then put on my new rotor, torquing down the screw to 10 Newton meters. Okay, so I applied the anti-seize. I cleaned the new brake rotor with brake parts cleaner. We put it on. We tightened up the nut. I'm sorry, the bolt. That's a T30. We went to 10 Newton meters. So now the disc is on. The next thing to do is to put on the caliper bracket. Of course, first I'm going to take it outside. I'm going to clean it up. I've got new brake springs, and we'll get it all set. Alright, so we cleaned these up. I put on new little spring things here. These get lubricated with brake pad paste, so I'll do that. And then we're going to go ahead and take this and put it back on using the large bolts over here. Okay, so this bracket is now torqued to 115 Newton meters, which is 85 foot-pounds, and that went on with the 18 millimeter bolts that I showed you. Okay, and now, next thing to do is we're going to take this caliper, we're going to use a tool to push the piston back in, and then put in our new brake pads. Alright, so what I like to do here is use a tool like this, and I'll take the old brake pad and use it as a cushion in which to push back the piston. So I will take the brake pad and just put it in here to cushion things, like this. Okay, then we'll take that tool and use the tool to push everything back in. Okay, so now the tool is set up, and I'll try to hold the camera and the light while I'm twisting here. So we're going to just twist, and we'll keep doing that until the piston is driven in. Okay, so now the piston is driven in. It's time to get the new brake pads, and we're going to put them in and then fit the floating caliper back on top of them. Alright, I've got the new brake pads greased in their appropriate points with Mercedes brake pad grease. That one's in. This guy's in. We're going to go ahead and slip the floating caliper right on top. Don't forget this. This goes right in to cover the piston. So you see the piston there, this guide goes right in to cover that, otherwise it'll squeak. Then you put the floating caliper on and tighten it up. Alright, these bolts get torqued down to 40 Newton meters with a 13 millimeter wrench. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, the wheel is on. We're torqued at 96 foot-pounds, which is 115 Newton meters. The car is off of its jack, and we should now have excellent suspension, and we should have good front brakes. So we'll take it on a little test drive and see how it goes. So there you have it, another cardiologist job.